So let's set it straight with are the short answer sections easy marks. Now, a lot of people think like, oh, like I'm just going to go in, it's just source analysis, it's fine, I'll get those easy marks. And it is an easier section to do well in because it is easier to get 3 out of 3, 4 out of 4, 6 out of 6, rather than getting 25 out of 25 on a full HSC national study essay, for example. But in saying that, they are such easy marks to lose if you don't do it right. And if you go in purely with content and you have not practiced applying it, or you have no idea how to apply it, you're going to lose the marks. In this section, and the source analysis is on purpose trying to show which students just, kind of rote learned and just memorized, which all of us do. And then which students have actually done in and put in that practice and really have those skills. So this section was specifically written with that intention, which is why I really wanted to focus on some skills today. So short answer features 50% of your paper, and there's more opportunities to lose marks in the source analysis section than the essays, because you might think like a good essay mark, for example, is 21 out of 25, which is 4 marks lost and 84%, so that's really good for modern history. But if you, for section 1, got 2 out of 3, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 7, and 7 out of 10, they're pretty good marks. You're just losing one or two here and there. That's 18 out of 25, which is a 72%, even though you're just losing a mark here, a mark there, two there. So I just wanted to put that just for reference, because you don't want to be losing these marks when they weigh just as much as the essays. I feel like even when I was doing modern history, it was always like, oh, the essays, oh, the essays, the essays. But the short answer is the same amount of marks. And in that case, it is easier to get them. I know I said like it's easy to lose them, but it is easy to gain them if you're doing the right thing. So I hope you can see some of those things throughout the lecture. Let's first talk about structure, because the structure of the response is dependent on how many marks are allocated to it. So they can range in marks anywhere from 1 to 8 marks. And then, of course, there's the 9 to 15 markers, which are extended responses, which are kind of like baby or like mini essays. Roughly speaking, you have about 2 minutes per mark, but you do have 45 minutes in total to complete the section. A lot of students can finish it in about 40 minutes. Some of the even faster ones can do 35 minutes. And the quicker you finish this section, the more time you do have for your essays. I only found out recently, I never actually knew this, but in modern history, NESA, when I was going through the documents reading it, NESA expects 8 pages for each essay, which is 1,000 words for each essay. That's their expectation, and that's what they're looking for as a base. So any time that you can save in the short answers is time that you 100% want to save. And the only time that you can save is by practicing, which is why I really recommend not overlooking it and being like, oh, I did fine in my class task, like it's fine, like it's just sources, I'll just come up with it on the day. There is quite a bit that you can do to prepare, and we're going to show you all of that today. So if you get a 1 to 2 mark question, get straight to the point. You don't need to even write in full sentences. Straight to the point. I personally have never seen a 1 marker, but I hope you guys get a 1 marker. It's a really easy mark to get. But for the 2 mark questions, you can directly, and a lot of the time they'll just be like an identify question, and we've got some examples in here. But you don't need any exposition. There's no introduction or context. You're just answering it as directly as possible. Only once you get to 3 to 5 markers are you going to full sentences. You can include some context, but you don't have to go overboard. It's nothing more than a sentence max. And you just want one piece of evidence. So whether that evidence is a detail, a statistic, or a source is up to you. But as you get up higher in the marks, you should be using different pieces of evidence. So for 6 to 8 mark questions, you want to start, and this is where you start bringing an introduction. For like a 3 marker, you don't need like an introduction and then going into your response. But for an 8 marker, it definitely makes sense. And as soon as you get to 8 and 9 is when it starts to turn more into like an extended response. So you should include a very, very short introduction, which is going to kind of outline your response, maximum 1 sentence, and then have at least 1 evidence per point, and have 1 point per 2 marks. So if you have a 6 marker, make 3 points and talk about 3 different features, and in each feature have a piece of evidence. Now, I want to quickly talk about evidence, because I feel like I used to think the same thing, where the only evidence was historian quotes, and historian quotes are the only thing that are going to prove anything. And historian quotes are a great form of evidence, but statistics and percentages, any details, even the use of terminology. So if you use a German term and then you put or if you use like the English term and then you put the German translation inside, that's a piece of evidence. And even if you're referring to a specific law, that's a piece of evidence, and that's the same weighting as a historian quote. So I never knew that. I was always like, oh, historian quotes are like holy grail. Like historian quotes are the best one to use. But HSC markers actually like to see when you're using a mix. So don't think you have to go overboard and you just need to know all this stuff about historian quotes. A lot of your content has stats and numbers in it already and has the terminology and the details and the official titles already. So you guys can 100% use that. So consider how many lines are given to you to fill, and that's roughly how long your response should be. So if you want to band 6, fill the lines, and if you really want to, really want to band 6, go a little bit over, but you don't have to go overboard, and there's no point. If it's a 3 marker and you're writing like all the way to the bottom of the page, why? The expectation just isn't there. So know that the lines that they give you is how much they expect for full marks, and that's what you should be aiming to fill in. Now, I hated task words so much in school because I feel like it's just I know what identify is, I know what explain means, but in the short answer section it tells you exactly how much to write and exactly what to write. And especially for modern history, because there aren't that many past papers around, the syllabus changed and the new syllabus has been running since 2019. So you can only sit the 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2024, 2023, 2020, 2019, 2020, 21, and 22 papers, which is 4 papers, which is pretty good. But for other subjects, like something like studies of religion, for example, the syllabus has not changed since 2009. So there are over 10 past papers that you can do, even more. So I think with modern history, a good thing with the task words is that if you understand them, you can kind of start coming up with your own questions. And especially for the essay, where there haven't been that many questions that have been assessed, you can come up with your own. And naturally all of the essay questions are just a dot point with a task word, and they can't really throw you off with the essay question. It might not be a content point that you thought you'd get, but it'll never be outside the syllabus too much. So I think that understanding the task word is so important, because then you can make up your own questions for a paper that doesn't have many past samples. So here we've got identify 2 features of Nazi ideology, describe the political impact of the Great Depression, explain the importance of the Weimar Constitution. Then we've got assess the significance of ideology, account for Stalin's rise to power, and analyze the changing relationship. So you can see that as you move along, the task word definitely increases in like depth and in the analysis required. And we're just going to quickly go through it. I know they're so easy to ignore and it's so default to just describe. Many of them require more critical thinking than others, and it's why it's so important that you know them. So I promise I'm not going to go too overboard in them, but we have to go through them, and I just am going to quickly run through this because I know it's so boring. But it's so important. So for example, if identify is just simply stating the key feature. So if you got the question, identify 2 features of Nazi ideology, social Darwinism and totalitarianism. You don't have to sit there. They'll give you 2 lines, but you don't have to write social Darwinism and a definition, or totalitarianism in a definition. Because if they wanted you to define it, they'd give you a question like here, and another task word is define. So it's not necessary. It's not a must. It's completely up to you how much you write. But if you know that you can get away with writing 4 words and you'd get 2 out of 2 with that, why would you make it harder for yourself and waste time writing like a full 2-liner when you can get away with 4 words? So that's why I wanted to show the task words, just so you can see how as the words change and kind of increase in depth, so do your responses. So for a definition question, especially in Nazi and in the core, you don't need much detail, but you want enough to distinguish it from similar items. And if you are going to use the German term, make sure that you put the translation in English translation in brackets, just because markers love to see it and it just shows better knowledge of the syllabus. But this is a definition. Now we've got explain the main differences between democracy and totalitarianism, where again, you're telling how the things work and how they came to be the way that they are. These are just sample questions and sample answers, but it's just to show you how, as you go along, the task word is wanting different skills. So for explain the main differences, it's kind of like you're doing a contrast, but you're just looking at what democracy is, and then you're going to obviously define what totalitarianism is, and then look at how democracy is all about the right and rights and freedoms, while totalitarianism is stringently controlling and limiting agency altogether. Then we've got describe, and describe is our favorite one. Describe the role of Joseph Goebbels. Describe is literally just spelling out the main aspects. It's the best task word, in my opinion, that you can get, because it's really just regurgitating content. But as soon as you get to outline and as soon as you keep moving on, it gets a little bit more. So if it's outline the key features of the Weimar Constitution, you're indicating the main features. Now, outline is different to identify, because identify is just point out. It's just like indirectly, like what is a key feature of the Weimar Constitution. And if it was that, you wouldn't have to write all this. If it was identify the key features of the Weimar Constitution, you could just write, like you could dot point like 1 and the Reichstag, 2 the Chancellor, and 3 the President. But because it's outline, and this is why it's so important to know the words, outline requires a full response. But again, the lines are always going to tell you that anyway. So as important as it is to know the task words, the lines that they give you will always show you how much you should be writing. So this answer talks about the 3 major components, so the Reichstag, the Chancellor, and the President, and it goes into each and has some examples as well. So if you are struggling with your notes, or these are any questions that you're not feeling the most confident with, they are in the slides, or if you wanted to take a screenshot, if anybody's writing notes as we go. But this is just an example of how, as you move along, the questions are going to require more. Now, when we get into compare and contrast and account for, that's when there's a lot more skill required. And this is where you start to miss the task words like identify and define. So compare and contrast is identifying the characteristics that they have in common or what makes them different. So it's really just the similarities and the differences. And account for is explaining, clarifying, and giving reason for, and normally it involves an argument. So a lot of the time, account for comes up in account for the perspective of this source, if it was to refer to the source. And we're going to really look into perspective, because there are parts of that you can pre-prepare. But account for is looking for that explanation and that reason. And again, it's an argument. While when you're doing a describe, you're not making any argument at all. So that's just as we come to these medium order task words, there's just a bit more critical thinking required. And then it gets all the way here to the higher order task words, which is assess, evaluate, to what extent. So the medium and the higher order task words are what they also use for the essays, which is why I wanted to show you these. I know it's like so typical and it can get really boring to study them, but the entire paper is using this language, and every question that you answer will have one of these words at the start. So you want to make sure that you know them and what they're asking of you. So we've got assess and evaluate, which is the value or importance. And if it's evaluating, you are making that judgment. If it's analyzing, you're breaking it down into component parts. And if it's a to what extent, again, you're making that judgment on the validity when accounting all known evidence. And these are just some example questions. But I just wanted to show those to you just so you guys can see how, as you move along, the expectation increases. And that's why when you go all the way back to identify, like it'd be beautiful if every question was just an identify and we could just, write 4 words and get the marks. But as you go along and as you get closer to the 6 to 8 markers, they're going to start getting more into these words, and especially these ones are the ones that they're using in essays.